Okay, so here we are in After Effects, and I'm going to show the animation that I created in order to get an animated texture, or essentially an image sequence. And so what you'll notice first is that I have a couple layers. If you've never used After Effects before, I'm going to go over the super basics of it so that you're able to do what you need to do. However, it's not going to be enough information for you to do really sophisticated animations without seeking some other tutorials or kind of getting more experience with the software. So just to dive in, our composition here has a frame rate of 24 frames per second, and it's 3 seconds long. So if we go up to our composition settings, we can see that it's got that 24 frames per second setting. And then down here under duration, this is where you would change how long it is. And so this is the seconds here, and then this is hours. Or sorry, this is minutes and this is hours. What we can do is also change the width and height. So this is 1024 by 1024. So it's a square. It's 1:1 aspect ratio. And that's just to make things easier when we bring this into Blender. It fits in that kind of 1:1 UV space. So this is a 1K image sequence essentially that we're going to be creating. So I'm going to click cancel. Okay, and then if I was just to press the spacebar, it'll play through the animation here. And what you can see is that I've got a shape layer that's turned off, but this is acting essentially as a mask for this layer. So this is the dark color, and then there's a shape that's essentially a square that expands to fill the whole frame. So I've used, if I use the toggle down here at the bottom to open up our track mats, you can see that I'm using an alpha inverted mat from layer 1. So whenever you create an animation using a shape, you can then choose to use that shape as an alpha mat for the layer below it. So this can just choose, in this case, the shape layer above it as the mat. And beneath that, I have a white solid layer that has a noise effect. So if I go up to effects, I've added noise. And then I've done some other work to make the noise larger. I have this mosaic effect because the noise itself is too small. So I kind of tricked it to be larger there. And then I have another layer that has this squiggly line. So I'm not going to go into how to make these necessarily. That's outside the scope of this demo. But if you're interested, you could follow some tutorials to make your own. This is available to download to use in your exercises. So what I'm going to do now is show you how you can export an animation that is 72 frames or 3 seconds long at 24 frames per second. What you do is, with the composition selected, you can go to File, Export, and then Add to Render Queue. And what that does is it takes that composition, I'm going to close these up, and it adds it here in the render queue. And this is like an internal rendering tool to After Effects. And so instead of lossless movie settings, we're going to change that to be a ping sequence. So if I change the format, I can come down to ping sequence, click OK, and now our output file name has these like hash symbols. And so that actually is a stand-in for frame number. So it will be named comp1 underscore and then 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And then the next one that gets rendered will from frame 2 will be 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, and so forth. So I'm actually going to rename that to TV screen underscore, and then I'm going to leave those as they are. And I'm going to choose a new folder. I'm going to call this TV screen sequence. Okay. And so it's an empty folder. With that folder selected, I'm going to click Save. And now if I hit Render, it's going to basically go to each frame of the After Effects animation, 72 frames, and make an image for each one. So if we go here to the folder and just take a look at, what did I call that? TV screen sequence. So you can see I've done this a few times. It's creating an image for each frame. Okay. So as you click through, you can kind of see it animate there. And so this is what the noise looks like. And if we were to now come into Blender, we know we want to get that animation onto this screen. So you would do that like you texture anything. If we go into UV edit mode, let's just press A to select all. And you can see that we need to actually do a UV layout here. And my selected face is actually in the bottom right. So we can see here that it's not really oriented properly. So the first thing I'm going to do is do an unwrap. So let's go to UV unwrap, and it gives us the proper orientation for that screen. If yours is rotated, feel free to rotate this and put it the way it's supposed to be. If you're not getting this what's closer to a 4:3 aspect ratio, make sure you apply the scale of your object. Otherwise, it being a square, if you've squashed it here, is not going to be correct, right? It's going to stretch your texture. So make sure that you do apply that scale before you UV unwrap. And I'm actually going to move this up into the middle. Because our animation is taking up this whole square, I want those, or the introduction, or the beginning of the animation rather, when it kind of turns on, that it's turning on in such a way where it looks like it's like symmetrical on top and bottom. Okay, I'll show you what that means in a second. So let's go to the shading view now that I have that done. And I'm going to zoom in here. To put the animation on this object, what I'm going to do is jump to our folder view and grab the first one and just drop it in, and you'll see it creates an image node. So you can also do Shift A and do search and search for an image texture node as well. It does the same thing. And now I'm going to choose, instead of single image here, I'm going to choose image sequence. And we've got 72 frames, so I'm going to choose 72. And just to confirm that, we're going to go down here to the end, and you see that it's numbered 00071. But if we look at the beginning, we have 0. So if you add 0 to that, or this first one, which is numbered 0, that actually is 72 frames. And so if I press A or Command A to select, or Control A if you're on a PC, you can see it says 72 selected. That's how we know there are 72 images here. So whenever it creates this image sequence, a lot of times it starts at 0 and not 1. So just be careful about that. Because we are starting at 0 and not 1, it would actually try to match frame 1 to image 1, meaning the image that has the number 1 in it. So what we want to do is offset this so that it starts with frame 0 in our folder here as that first frame. So it's basically taking it from starting from this one to starting from this one. That's what -1 does. So I'm gonna also turn these on as well. Auto refresh just makes it so we can see it refresh in the viewport every time we change frame. It should update with a new image. And now we need to connect this. Let's connect it to our base color just to see. And we want to create a separate material for this object. So let's just let's click on this button here, and this particular object's material, we're going to create a new one. We're going to call this TV plastic, and we're going to call this TV screen. And you'll see that it's just a black color. And if I pull out a timeline here so we can scrub through, you'll see it's actually animating now. All of our other objects still have that on there, so let's remove that. And we're going to add something called metal knob. call this, let's remove that, make a new one. I'm gonna call this TV Plastic 2. Okay, and then we're gonna select the screen again so we can kind of double check that everything is working. You'll notice that it's repeating, and if we turned off cyclic, it actually wouldn't repeat. It would just play through once and not repeat those. So what we need to do is make our timeline 3 seconds long. So let's just choose 72 here. And then we can turn on cyclic or leave it off. It doesn't matter. There are 72 frames and 72 images. So this would line up perfectly. I'm going to turn it on just in case. It's just a good habit. And what we want to do is make this glow. So there's a couple ways to do that. We could either use the emission node, the material, and we could essentially have this be the light source because that's effectively what's happening. So now we have, if we were to turn off our light, we can see that the only light source in the scene right now is essentially the screen. And we can make that really bright. So the nice thing about the emission is that we can add strength. I actually want to use the principled, I think, for this because principled will allow me to make it look like it's a glass screen as well. So I'm going to just kind of disconnect this and leave it out of the way here. I have it in base color, which is fine. I can leave it there, but I can also tie this down into emission. And so now it's glowing as well as has the base color. And the other thing I can do is I can take the roughness way down like glass would be, and then I can also add a clear coat. And a clear coat makes it look like something has a secondary reflection, like a see-through surface on top of it. And I think that's probably all I need for that to make it look a bit more realistic. Let's turn that light back on and we should be able to get some glare. It might be hard to see in Eevee here, but if I went to cycles, we can see we might be getting some glare up here. Especially as we change angle, we should be able to see a sheen. But it should look a bit more realistic, but you can use that emission node if you'd rather control it that way instead. So let's go ahead and add some more material color. So I'm going to choose maybe a darker plastic here. A little bit of red in there. And then let's choose another. Okay, so this knob we're going to make aluminum. So instead of configuring all of these parameters, I have that PBR Materials plugin by 3D Wolf installed. So I'm going to choose metal and then choose aluminum. However, when I come in and configure aluminum, I think I'm going to turn on anisotropic and drop some of the reflection by increasing the roughness. So it's going to make it a bit more of a matte finish, and then I can increase anisotropic. And then I think I can also increase rotation, but let's just see if we can get that working. All right, so if I was to smooth shade this, and then we want to come down here to auto smooth so that it doesn't smooth it too much, and then we want to create a highlight around the rim, so we're going to add a Bevel Modifier. And I have a frame selected on my quick menu here, on my favorites. So I'm going to just reduce the size of that and maybe add 2 segments. All right, so that looks pretty good. Okay, we're we're going to jump back to Eevee here. Let's go back and turn on some of these. We're actually going to render an Eevee because it's much faster. So I'm just going to turn on some features in Eevee. Ambient occlusion, blooms, screen space reflections. We're going to increase the quality of our shadows. And then I am going to leave a light source in the scene. I'm going to come to the light settings and change that radius just to soften the light. So we're going to increase the size here. And I think I want to move this maybe forward like that. Maybe something directly ahead. And so we should get some good kind of room lighting there. I might drop this down. There we go. Okay, and let's just make this larger. Okay, so as this plays through, I think when the TV kind of turns on, I want the whole room to get brighter. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. So when it gets maybe to here, it's full brightness. So I'm going to go here and animate that. So I'm going to press I while hovering over power. That's going to add a keyframe. And then I'm going to go here and just reduce this to 0. And I'm going to press I to keyframe that. Okay, and now it looks like, we're getting more light from the TV than we really are. I might just drop this down to 300 or 350. That 350 might be a good setting. I'm going to keyframe over that. And so it's not quite as bright. And we're going to select that. And it looks like I added an extra keyframe, so we'll just delete that. Okay, so it looks like the animation on the TV is also impacting the light in the room. And so all we did was just keyframe that light power. Okay, so I want to go ahead and add some wood material. I'm not going to do anything very complicated. I think it's just going to be this color here. We're going to call that furniture. And I'm going to add that here as well. So I'm going to choose that from our list. And I'm going to call this floor. I'm going to choose a bright color for the floor for contrast. So we'll do maybe a green. Let's take a look at our camera and lock our camera to the view. All right, so that looks like it's going to work. Now what we want to do, let's just tweak this. Now what we want to do is to maybe make a rendered animation. And it's pretty easy. So if we go to our render settings here, you see that it defaults at 1080p, which is what we want. Start frame and end frame are what's on your timeline, which is 1 to 72, which is also what we want. Frame rate is 24 frames per second, also what you want. And we just need to configure our output directory. So I'm going to click on that folder and just choose a place for our renders to go. So I'm going to call this renders. And then we're going to choose that folder. And here you can see it's set in the output settings. And right now, ping is the default. Don't choose a video format because I want to show you how to bring an image sequence into After Effects to create an animation. You may have to do that in the future, and just exporting a video file is going to reduce the amount of visual quality or image quality that you're going to get. So ping will work for us. If you're making a short film and you need really fine control over all of the color information possible, OpenEXR is going to be the format that you use because it's going to allow you to control exposure and things like that with a lot more color information than you get from what we're getting in Ping. So we are going to choose Ping because this isn't a feature film. So now that we have that set, all we have to do is go to render animation. And what will happen is instead of rendering one image, Blender will go through each frame and render a new frame. So you can see here it's on frame 5 and it's going to go all the way to 72. So we're going to wait for this to finish rendering. So now that it's done rendering, note that it took over 3 minutes, probably about 4 minutes to render. If this was a 30-second animation rather than a 3-second animation, it would be 10 times longer. So that would take 40 minutes rather than 4 minutes. Render times are important to keep in mind so that you can finish rendering your project on time. All right, so let's go ahead and see what we ended up with. So if we just take a look now at the render folder that I just created, which is this one, we'll see that I've got the animation now rendered out on individual frames, and my light looks like it's getting affected appropriately. And now what we can do is bring this into After Effects. So I'm going to start a new project so you can see what it looks like. So when you open After Effects, you can close everything that isn't this main screen here. You don't have to create a new composition. All you have to do is grab that folder that you rendered to with just the images in it and drop it here in the project folder, not the effects. So go to project if you're not on project. This will automatically bring in your images as footage. You can also do it manually by right-clicking and then importing, I believe, multiple files. But the easiest way is just to drop the folder in, so that's what I do. First thing you should do is change the frame rate from 30 to 24 by right-clicking, interpret footage, main. Change that to 24 and click OK. And now you can see, looks like I pressed the wrong button there. Let's try that again. 24 frames per second is now in the information. It's 1920 by 1080. And so now what we can do is drop this. We have to go sort of to the empty timeline here. I was on the render queue before. Let's try that again. Drop that down, and now it will create a composition for us. And the composition is 3 seconds long. You can see that here at the end. So it's the right length. If you do 30 frames a second, it's going to go too fast and not be what it's supposed to be. So if we just press the space bar, it will play through. Let's zoom in and try that again. Right, so that looks pretty good. Okay, and now we can do some post effects, or we can export it as a video. I'm going to click on Effect Controls just so we can see our effects. And under the Effects and Presets drop down, I'm going to add 2 things that I usually add to make more visual interest. You can leave this as is, but if you want to practice adding effects, I like to drag on the CC Vignette. You can just drop it here on the footage and then drag the amount down. I think 18 is a good setting for my computer. Maybe bring that up a little bit. I think it's darker than the last one that I tried. Sometimes you get this banding here where there's not really enough color information. So you're actually seeing the limitations of the color spectrum we have available. So what you can do is add something like noise to try to mask that. So under noise and grain, it's just called noise. We can drop that second in the list and increase it just slightly. And it starts to mask those banding kind of problems that we were getting by adding more information. So when we play back, you can actually see there's noise to make it feel a little bit more organic or more film-like. If you don't like that, of course, you don't have to use that. But that's kind of all I really need to do. If I wanted to do something like add a lens flare, which you shouldn't really ever do, but I'm going to do it anyway, we can drop that on, and then I don't know, I think we can move that. This is a terrible idea, but we can drop the brightness down, and I think we can actually drop it above Vignette to be first in our list, and we can change the type if we want to try different ones. There's actually plugins if you want to do vignettes that are like, you know, you might see in an action movie or something. Gonna blend it. There we go. So just like I did in Blender where I keyframed that light, I'm gonna go ahead and keyframe the brightness here. So we're gonna go 88, and then it's gonna be 0. Okay, so just to show you where that's keyframed, if we open up effects and go under lens flare, flare brightness is keyframed here. This is requires more knowledge of After Effects if you don't know how to do keyframing. Essentially, you turn on this stopwatch icon to enable keyframing, and then you can essentially click this button to add a keyframe. This is, again, more advanced. You don't have to add, nor should you really ever add lens flare, but I'm doing it because I can. So there we go. Some magical TV here with lens flare. All right, now that I've ruined it, it's time to render this. So we want 2 renders. We want for yourself, your own archives, to produce a super high quality one. So we're going to add to render queue, second in the list under export. And this is going to be what we want. This is lossless. This is going to be huge file size. So when we click render, actually let's change the output folder to be, so we're going to call this, you know, final underscore, you know, final 2, whatever your naming convention is, last one, and, you know, save that, and then we can click render. And then this is going to be the animation that you can make other compressed video from. It's going to have really loud noise in 3, 2. It's terrifying. Okay, so we can jump back here and just take a look at that. Final 2, last one. Let's open that up. That's a joke, by the way. You should never name your files final because it's literally never the final one. Okay, so let's just play this back. All right, it worked. So this has to be converted by QuickTime on my computer because it can't play. So I have to actually delete the conversion. It can't play it back. That's an older one. Oh, that's the one I started with. It can't play it back because it's lossless. It's 450 megabytes, which is huge. So what we can do is now do our streaming video version. So if we go back to File, Export, open up Media Encoder, this will send the project to the Media Encoder, which is separate Adobe software. So you can see a Media Encoder here popping up. Okay, and then you will have to wait about a minute or 2. Maybe it'll go faster for me, but it doesn't always appear immediately. So we're just gonna wait for that to come up. Okay, so now that it's popped up, you'll see that it defaults at H.264 and Vimeo 1080p for me. If it doesn't for you, you can click on the drop-down arrow and choose Vimeo 1080p Full HD. And this should be H.264. That's the one that you want. Don't choose any of these other ones. The new Apple video file is HEVC, and this is too new for anything to really be compatible with it, even though it's better. Stick with H.264. That's what most video online streams with. So this is the kind of codec or compression format we want. And this is going to be this the default settings that we want to go with here the Vimeo settings. So we're going to press play, and that's going to go ahead and convert that file for us. Okay, so now that that's done converting, if I click on that link, I can see it here in our temporary folder. So I have to actually drop that back into the main folder, my project folder. So this is what you're going to submit. I'm going to rename this, whatever the file name convention is that I give you in the assignment. But if we double click that, you can see it's not quite as good of quality. There's some compression artifacts, but our lens flare is still here, thank goodness. But if we go back here, we can see that it's 6.5 megabytes. And if you forget, the other one is 450. So that's pretty incredible. Considering we don't lose that much visual quality, that's the power of video compression. So this would be something that you would upload to Vimeo. There's also a YouTube preset, though the Vimeo preset will work just fine for that. And that's essentially it. So I'm just gonna play through this one more time. Incredible. So if you go to the website, you can see here that there's an image sequence you can download to use on your TV screen. Okay, so that concludes the exercise.